Okay, welcome to the Bucky call for this May 11 and 12, depending on what continent you're on. We've just been casually talking. We're waiting for other people to join us. We think maybe joining us. Did Anne say she was going to join us today, Richard? Did she say she was going to be gone today?
No, she said she was going to join, but she might be a bit late because she was going off to another event a few
Okay.
hours ago.
All right, good. As long as we've heard from her, because I could WhatsApp her and see what's going on. We're doing something kind of unique today because in the last year or so plus, we finished the book. We finished the actual reading of the book, Critical Path, and we come to the next thing that's happening is appendix number one. Appendix number one that's on page 347 of the book. And appendix number one is a chronology of scientific discoveries and artifacts that basically were part of Bucky's research and reasoning for doing this book, Critical Path. And today, because that's where we are, we're going to go through that appendix and discuss it on the base of a chronophile, which Bucky in his book, Critical Path, a chronophile is a file of a chronology of events. I think I said that right. Don't you think, Richard? A chronophile is a file of a chronology of events that basically are the foundation of the context of the conversation. And we thought what we would do is just go to that book and start going down through that chronophile. And as part of that, Richard, with his work at the university, has utilized this concept of chronophile. And I'm thinking what we might want to do is I'm going to go through and do our little introductions here. And then I think what we'll do is turn it over to you, Richard. So you be last. So what we'll do is I'll do my little introduction. I'll invite Marin and Nelson and Karen to just say hello, how they're feeling and what they inspect today. And then if Nelson and Karen, if you'll turn it over to Richard afterwards, he'll then talk about how he's feeling and then kind of put the context together for what we're going to do tonight. So I'll go ahead and do that. So I am delighted to be here, and it's great to see you guys, Nelson and Karen, here. Looking forward to maybe some of the other people joining us because I think the more outside contribution we can get to this book, it's been really helpful getting different opinions and different applications of this book as we go. So I'm looking forward to it. And about the chronophile, I'm looking forward to the opportunity of like looking at what facts and what dates Bucky thought were important in terms of the critical path of human development, and seeing what I can add to that, if any, or at least putting my perspective on it. And we'll see how that goes as it happens. So Nelson and Karen, how are you feeling, each of you? And what do you expect to get out of today's call? And then when you're complete, go ahead and pass it to Richard.
I feel very interesting in this come back to fuller study. And I expect to return to all of the events in the Bucky Fuller life and know what is we apply with the other systems in our family, in our society, in our community. This is what I expect. Nelson, what do you feel and what do you expect?
Thank you. I feel very enthusiastic. I, I, I feel gratitude, gratitude with Steve and Richard, uh, because I want to return in this meeting, and thank you for your asset. Okay. Okay, well, thank you.
Good.
That I feel. Richard, what do you feel and what do you expect?
Well, thank you. Yes. Well, I feel excited about the opportunity to talk about the chronophile. In another group that I belong to that talks about Buckminster Fuller, we were discussing the chronophile that he created over his lifetime. And the suggestion, I think I actually made the suggestion, that it'd be interesting to look at some of the critical dates that were important to Buckminster Fuller and do a parallel of our own dates in terms of what were we doing or what was happening in our life when he was born, when he was doing things in the 1900s and in the 1930s and 40s. So I put together two columns. One is Bucky's chronophile information, starting from the time that he was born in 1895, and then one on myself, starting basically at 1895. And I made some notes about what happened in my discipline of social work in the late 1800s in Europe. And then I matched things happened in my life with dates that were important to Fuller. At least he wrote them down. And what we wanted to do tonight was to use my chronophile as an example, and perhaps we would come up with events in our own lives, or in this case, also events that belong to our history that maybe he didn't put into his document, but I would think is important, or you would think is important. And so we might be able to expand on his chronophile in a way that is relevant or important to us, or at least it's connected to our own life experience. So that's that's what we want to discuss tonight. And of course, as Stephen was saying, if we follow his model, he starts in the Stone Age and works his way up. But just as an example, he said that in 3,400 BC, irrigation systems started in Egypt. And what I'm interested in, for example, for those of us that might know some of the history of North America or South America or Asia, do we know of something that happened in 3,400 BC that happened in, say, our continent or our region of the world? And we could make a note to that effect, and that would be part of our discussion. So that's over to you, Steve, and maybe we can begin the dialogue that way. And we can start back as far as we want, all the way back to 4,000 BC, or move up, several centuries and begin to get into a time period that's connected to our own lives.
Yeah. Well, taking your inspiration, Richard, this is what you're seeing on the screen is right from the book. This is the PDF file of the book. This is page 348. After Bucky gives a little introduction about what a chronophile is and important events in history. And of course, here's what here's the right here, irrigation systems in Egypt that Richard mentioned in 3,400 BC. If we start at the top, in ancient Stone Age tools for at least 3 million years, 4,000 BC, Picto-linguistics writing in Tartaria, 3500 BC, bronze was discovered in Thailand. 3500 BC, Sumerian pictographic writing evolves later into cuneiform. 3480 BC, grain, domesticated animals, pictograms, copper, silver, gold, tin, lead, zinc, iron, carbon, sulfur, mercury, levers, wheels and wheeled vehicles, sledges in Scandinavia, stone wall structures, and coal known, but its potential is unrecognized. So coal was known back in pre-3480 BC, but it wasn't really recognized. Then here's 3400 BC, Mesopotamian evidence that number language preceded written language by thousands of years. And then here's, of course, the irrigation system that Richard mentioned. So I went out and said, what happened? I said, what happened in America in 3000 BC? And the answer that I got was, in 3000 BC, the First Nations peoples of North America had developed complex languages, social organization, artistic traditions, and religious belief systems. The earliest documented evidence of corn in the Americas was found in western New Mexico, with samples dating back to 2450 to 2060 BC. The corn was found in a layer associated with a pre-Pueblo occupation, indicating that people who still practiced hunting and gathering had begun to transition to growing domesticated plants. However, it would be more than 1,000 years before corn became a primary food source. So this is the idea, I think, Richard, you invited us to take a look at. You know, these are things that Bucky saw. Well, what do we see? And I've studied Mayan culture a little bit, and maybe Nelson and Karen, you guys have studied prehistory and early history in the Americas and South America. Maybe you guys have something to contribute. Do you guys know anything about the Aztec or the Mayan or the Toltec or the Otec cultures down there in 3000 BC?
Yes, the Incas in Peru have a large history about the pictograms, about the language, about the symbols to use to communicate with all of the civilizations in this moment in America, because they have a lot of culture about this Argentina to all of the South America.
Very cool. Yeah, in fact, I've done a little study of that. I have in my own library a little map here. Now, this doesn't go back to 3000 BC, but this goes back to 1500 BC. And this shows in Mexico, Valley of Mexico, and goes into Guatemala, Yucatan, and down into Peru, and what you mentioned, Karen. So early villages, different tribes or nations, Teotihuacan, and then the Toltecs in 900 BC or 900 AD, because here's 0. So you know, in the BC era, we had pre-classic Maya going back, and yeah, and we don't have very good history. We haven't really done a lot of the pyramids and a lot of the archaeological findings here. Here's 2500 BC, early villages, and the highlands. So this is in Peru. So this mentions exactly.
Yes.
So that's something.
Yeah.
And we can I'm going to do that same search. Maybe if it's appropriate, maybe I'll grab this language about and stick it in our own little file, Richard. I think that's what we're kind of do.
Yes.
What do you think? Where are we now? And any other feedback from anybody? Richard, what do you think's good?
Well, as I say, we could move up on the history dates for a little bit, see if there was other connections, either from our perspectives in North America or South America. Then we can jump up to something that's closer to our own lives in terms of our dates that we're familiar with, and looking at some of the things that Fuller did and whether we have dates and events that match up with the years that he did certain things. And that's what my chronophile is all about. I matched different years that he did something, and then I connected it to something that happened in my life, either before I was born and after I was born, and into my career as a psychosocialist, if you want. So we might want to move up into the contemporary sort of post 1900s, and see what kind of connections we have in our own living experiences with connected to dates or events that were important to Fuller.
It would be nice to transition up there as soon as possible, I think. I did do another little investigation, and here's something in 5000 BC. But I just put it in the chat, the 5,000-year-old 626 hectare archaeological site of the sacred city of Caral-Supe is situated on a dry desert terrace overlooking the green valley of the Supa River. It dates back to the late Archaic period of the central Andes, and is the oldest center of civilization in the Americas. So that was 5000 BC. And I have a little fact here about 4200 BC. I'll just throw those in and I think it's good to move into more current things as quickly as possible. And yet I want to cover at least the points that he brought up. Here's some stuff about 4200 BC. Susa, alongside its allies, is invaded and destroyed in 4200 BC. The city of Anshan is founded in circa 4000 BC. Alongside Susa, begins to separate itself culturally from the West, developing the lands with newly integrated peoples in the Proto-Elamite culture. Doesn't have much meaning for what we're doing, and Bucky was trying to focus on, no, he wasn't trying. Bucky focused on developments that he thought were critical in terms of development of and the progress of human beings from his point of view, that we're all billionaires. And there's the point there about in 4000 BC, the first Neolithic settlers in the island of Thera, Santorini, and Greece migrated probably from, okay, so that didn't help me much. Here's the around 4000 in the southeastern woodlands of North America. And then we'll move here quickly. I'd like to get to the current dates as well, as quickly as possible. So I'm going to stick this down here. Here's around 4000 BC, people in the southeastern woodlands of North America began to exploit wetland resources. Cool. All right. And let's move rapidly to see what else we can do to get to the current thing, because I have your document here, Richard, up to go as well. So when we get to the 1890s here, we'll switch over and do a try comparison. And so let me see, that's my Yucatan. So here we go. So he said 3100 BC, Egyptian hieroglyphs were developed. 3000 BC, Chinese ideograms, complex generalized concepts. And the Mayans had thousands and thousands and thousands of books. When the Spaniards got here, they went about the Aztec and the Incas. The Aztec culture had thousands and thousands of books of this Mayan writing that had gone through thousands of years, and the Spaniards destroyed most of that writing in the Americas. There are 5 codexes left. From what I know of the American history, the priest who was in charge of burning all these Mayan books and Aztec books was on a rampage, went back to Europe, and then felt remorse for having done so. And toward the end of his life, he came back to the Americas as a beggar and went from house to house and door to door and village to village, confessing his the wickedness of his previous acts and pleading with anybody to give him some codexes or writings from the Mayan culture. And in fact, I have one of those. Let's see if I have the codex here in my. Geez, there we go. I don't have it. Hang on. I've had a personal spiritual experience relating to these codexes. My goodness, I don't have the pictures here. I'm going to look for them. I'm going to share this, I think. Let me see, is it appropriate? I'm going to look for these I'm going to turn the discussion over, and maybe Richard, you can read down through, we'll go through page by page. I'm going to look through and find this. I've had a couple of spiritual visions about the Mayan culture relating to Kukulkan. Kukulkan is the Mayan name for Quetzalcoatl. Quetzalcoatl was the Aztec name for the sun god. There was a tradition that among the Aztecs that this Quetzalcoatl would come out of the east and restore peace to the people, and that Quetzalcoatl would come in these clouds, white clouds of glory, and would visit the people. And when the Aztecs saw the Spaniards with their white ships, the white sails on their ships coming out of the east, landing on their eastern shores, they thought they were having the completion of their vision of the coming of Quetzalcoatl to the people, and they held the Spaniards in high regard because they stepped off their ships in shiny silver armor and with their white clouds, the sails in their ships. It was quite mystical to them, and it's reported that the Aztecs, in order to honor the Spaniards, sacrificed a 14-year-old boy and brought the heart of the 14-year-old boy to the Spaniards, and that gave the Spaniards all they needed for an excuse to call the Aztec savages and to steal their gold. And so that began the imperialistic takeover and the complete wipeout of the Aztec culture by the Europeans. But that, of course, happened AD, and we're going to go about it from there. So, Richard, I'm sorry this is so out of context. I feel badly that I didn't prepare better for it. But here's a sharing, and maybe we can go down through some of this. What do you think? Well, let's go and try to catch up to the 1800s, because I think we can do that in a page or two. Okay? There we go. So we left off at 3400 in Egypt. Do you want to read through? And do you have a copy of your book there, Richard?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Because if you can do that, then I can forget about the screen here, and you can kind of read through the book, and I'm going to let the screen be, and I'm going to do what I can to find some stuff in the background, because I like to find those codexes. I know if I do a search, I'll find them. So if you want to read through your book and just go from 3400, we'll go from there.
Yeah, we're going to leave. Okay.
If you want, that'd be cool.
Well, I'm just going to jump pages. Like the first page went from 4000 BC to 1000 BC, and we've talked about several things in that period. If you go to the second page, on page 349, I've made some markings in 600 to 400 BC. The Greek people were the first humans known and recorded to think of our world as a sphere, a spherical entity. And then in 350 BC, again, there was an awareness that the Earth's sphere is spinning west to east. And that, I don't know if that really registered for people to understand that it's not the sun that's moving, but it's the Earth that's moving. And so the language of sunset and sunrise are incorrect descriptions of what is happening. And then if we go to the next page, We can get up to, well, it starts at 150 BC, but there's a period of time, 200 AD. And I made a note here because of my experience in India several years ago, that when the Portuguese explorers in 1492 or 4 arrived from Portugal, one of the places they landed was the southern tip of India. And when they arrived in India, they discovered that there was a group of people there that called themselves Christians. And they, in history, they're known as Syrian Christians. And they had come to that part of the...
What year was this, Richard?
200 AD.
200 AD. Okay, cool.
And so when the Portuguese arrived in 1492, and they discovered these people were Christians, they immediately started giving them the most recent news about the Pope, the Roman Pope. And the Syrian people had no idea what they were talking about. Because in history, of course, the Roman Catholic, if you want, Pope system didn't come into being until 800 AD. So these people had been in India since 200 AD, so they had no idea that there was something called a Pope. And
man, I'll tell you, I would love to have been there, Richard.
Yeah, it was.
Here are these practicing Christians with their religion, and suddenly find out that this Pope had become this political religious leader, and how it affected their religion. I'd love to be a fly on the wall there. That would be so amazing.
And then we can go over to the next page. It starts at 800 AD, and it says at 1000 AD, Leif Erikson reaches America. And of course, Leif Erikson would have come from the Scandinavian countries, one of the Vikings.
Right.
You know, I remember as a student growing up in Canada, we had to study about the Vikings coming to Canada, but it was always overshadowed by the fact that everybody sort of recognized that the idea, anyway, that Columbus discovered the Americas.
You know, in American schools, we did the same thing. We heard about Leif Erikson and the Vikings, how they came down around from the north and came down through the northern coast of Canada, and then dropped into, I even think maybe they came down into the US area territory. But I know we discussed it and then quickly put it behind in order to celebrate Columbus.
Right, yeah.
And there was a big discussion as to why wasn't America called Columbia when Americas, you know, why are we named America instead of Columbia?
Right.
Yeah, that was a big part of the discussion back then. And it must be funny for you, Nelson and Karen, down in there in Colombia, to, you know, having this native American experience, right? And then to hear us white guys up here pontificating about all these discussions. Do you have anything to say? Do you guys want to come off mute and talk about, like, did you guys learn about Leif Erikson in school?
Yes, we're learning all of this history about Columbus in the Americas, because when I studied the in my university about the communities in the Indian communities is very different to the study in the high school about Cristobal Colon, about the Europeans in America. Is very different.
Yeah, it's so then
we have Amerigo Vespucci was the Italian explorer and navigator from the Republic of Florence, who's termed This is where America comes from. From Amerigo, we call Amerigo Vespucci. Navigator, Republic. Why did we get into, does anybody remember why we end up being called the Americas? Richard, do you know why we were called the
No,
Americas?
I don't
Jeez.
actually. Talking about that, the one that really always intrigued me was when I spent half a year in India. I was always taught, if you want, by Indian people themselves, as well as out of my own textbooks, that people from India were known as East Indians.
Yeah.
And when I got there, and I fully understood that people from India are Indians, and so I started asking, why do you allow the world, if you want to identify you as East Indians, when you're actually the real Indians? You know, you're the and I think it had to do with again the sort of British Empire kind of concept, where anything east of London was considered east,
Right.
and anything west was considered west. So of course, when Columbus arrived in the Americas,
Those are the
he
West Indians.
he arrived and saw the West Indians. And so people in the two Americas are often referred to as West Indians. And the Asian people are East Indians, which doesn't make any sense to me, but that's kind of
But
how it's been done.
we still operate from that paradigm. I mean, you mentioned quickly about the Greeks, I think, from discovering that the Earth was a globe and that the sun actually didn't rise and set, that the actually the sun eclipses as the Earth turns, and then as the dawn of the new day comes, there's an anti-eclipse. And still, even though those are the facts, we as humans kind of put a veil and disregard reality and pretend that the sun rises and sun sets, which is weird. You brought that up, and I think that's a key point. That's a big thing with Bucky. I have some other information here about Amerigo Vespucci. Between 1497 and 1504, Vespucci participated in at least two voyages of the Age of Discovery. First on behalf of Spain, 1499 to 1500, and then for Portugal in 1501 and 1502. In 1503 and 1505, two booklets were published under his name, containing colorful descriptions of these explorations and other alleged voyages. Both publications were extremely popular and widely read across much of Europe, although historians still dispute the authorship and veracity of these accounts. At the time, they were instrumental in raising awareness of the new discoveries and enhancing the reputation of Vespucci as an explorer and a navigator. Vespucci claimed to have understood back in 1501 during his Portuguese expedition that Brazil was part of a fourth continent known to Europeans, which he called the New World. The claim inspired cartographer Martin Waldseemüller to recognize Vespucci's accomplishments in 1507 by applying the Latinized form America for the first time to a map showing the New World. Other cartographers followed suit, and by 1532, the name America was permanently affixed to the newly discovered continent. There we go. There's a little background. Boy, we've got about 14 facts rolling around in the air here. Any other thoughts or comments? I have one more thing to share before we head out.
Okay.
Any other thoughts or comments?
Well, I do in relation to the 1400s. In 1490 something is when the Doctrines of Discovery were written, that gave the explorers the authority to claim the lands that they reach, which happened to be West Indies. And the doctrines of discovery have been the authoritative foundation over the years for the Europeans, in this case, to claim that if the native people of the Americas, where they arrived, did not identify as Christians, then the Pope gave them the authority to declare domain, if you want, over those people.
What
And
year
of
was
course,
it, Richard? What
well,
year?
it was in the 1490s, and there was two doctrines of discovery.
Does Bucky have those in his book here? He doesn't, does he?
No, all he has is the Moors were driven from Spain, and then he talks about Columbus discovering America, and then in 1497, Cabot lands in North America. And the
Yeah.
thing about North America is that King Henry VII put out his form of doctrines of discovery, which were called letters patent, and he gave the same authority to those who reached North America, that if the people that they reach, if there are people, if they're not Christians, then they have the authority to declare the land as vacant, if you want, and the authority to confiscate the land, in effect.
And what was the patents term? You had Doctrines of Discovery. What year was that?
Well, that was about, say, 1492.
Okay, and where did that come? What was the source of that?
That came from the Roman Pope.
From the Pope.
Yeah.
And what was the patents one?
And then it was King Henry VII, before King Henry VIII, but King Henry VII that declared the letters patent in the same 1400 period of time. I don't have the exact date, but he gave the same authority to the Northern Europe explorers, that if they found land and they found people on the land, that if they weren't Christians, then they had the authority to confiscate the land or declare the land theirs. And there's a big law case in the United States under the former Justice Minister, or not Justice Minister, Supreme Court Justice. I'm blocking on her name now, the one that died a couple of years ago. And even though she was a great human rights lawyer and justice, she presided over the case that where Indian people in the east coast of the United States, northeast coast of the United States, actually gathered up enough money to buy back their original lands. And the justice of the Supreme Court who sat on that, she ruled that that would override the doctrines of discovery, and that was impossible, that they remained the basis for declaring European dominance over the new Americas.
Well, what do those documents have to do with the divine right of kings? Because I know a little bit about the divine right of kings, but I'm obviously not aware of the historical context. What did that have to do with the divine right of kings? Do you know?
Well, I mean, the one is the divine right of the Pope, and then the other one with King Henry VIII is tied to the idea of the divine right of the kings.
Okay,
and so
cool.
that's why he wrote it in the form of a letters patent that basically authorized his explorers to take over the land.
Yeah, here's a sample of the letters patent, which you mentioned. Victoria by the grace of God. And
Yeah,
so
God's always the authority.
God's always the authority. That's where this translates eventually to the divine right of kings. And the divine right of kings, although I'm skipping a few historical milestones, maybe translated into what was it called in America? We had this old thing going on, go west, young man, go west, and it was the divine right of kings was manifest destiny. That's what it was. And so in the Americas, the United States took on this right of manifest destiny. So if I'm going to put this together, we had doctrines of discovery led to letters of patent, led to the divine right of kings, led to the manifest destiny, which gave the Americans the right to migrate west and settle and totally, commit genocide against Native Americans.
Right.
So somehow those are all, isn't that interesting? We had manifest destiny in America. We justified.
Yeah.
Wow. Did you guys
And-
have a manifest destiny in Canada? Do you know that? Did you have that?
Well, ours was tied back to the letters of patent.
Uh-huh.
And then because um, the Europeans or the British who came in through Rupert's Land, which is the northern part of Canada, then they were given possession of the territory. And when Canada became a nation, then these lands, if you want, were turned over to Canada, but Canada followed the same sort of right to exploit the native people in civilizing the West.
Right. Quote, in quote, civilizing, right?
Yeah, right, in quotes.
Wow.
And that was all done through the whole concept of getting intercontinental railroad that went from the east to the west.
Right. Same thing happened in America and
Mhm.
in the US. Well, this is wonderful. It's kind of humbling to, I wonder, in what ways am I living such an egotistical, narcissistic, self-consumed way in my life? What is it that because obviously the people who lived under the principle of manifest destiny thought they were in great shape, right?
Right.
I mean, they had a divine right to take over the land. It translated from the divine right of kings.
Yeah. The other
Yeah.
thing, talking about that in terms of the label, when I was in India, I was in a, well, it was actually had to do with a movie that the um, filmmakers on campus made. But one of the things it showed was the meaning of savage. And the original meaning of savage was people of the forest.
Oh, wow.
And now you see how that term was bastardized over the centuries to mean uncivilized or basically outside the human condition in many cases, which is what would justify genocide.
Yeah. To me, a savage is nearly a cannibal. Connotatively in my mind, once the next step is cannibal. First
Yes.
is, and then you have cannibal. So I'm gonna,
And as it turned out, my guess would be people of the forest, in many respects, were probably vegetarians.
yeah. And here's the definition of savage. As an adjective, savage means lacking human control, untamed, or fierce. For example, you might describe a beast as savage. Savage can also mean wild, uncultivated, and rude. For example, you might describe someone's manners as savage. Savage. A brutal person. Savage means a brutal person. As a verb, savage means to attack ferociously. These were the people of the forest,
Yeah.
mind you. Yeah. Savage means a person who doesn't live in civilization. Savage is a barbarian. Means someone who speaks in an audacious, hilarious, and often sarcastic manner. 2019 film director. Okay, cool. Well, I think that I wanted to share with you one other thing because I want, oh, sheet, I just inadvertently delivered those. Let me go Mayan Codex. I want to show these to you because these have special meaning to me. These are the Mayan. What do Mayan Codex say? The pages of the codexes usually depict a deity and include a series of glyphs describing what the deity is doing. Many pages of these books also contain lists and numbers that allowed the Maya to predict lunar and solar eclipses. What are the four? I thought there were 5 Mayan codexes. Evidently, there are only 4. The 4th codex, lacking hieroglyphs, is the Maya Toltec rather than Maya. It remained controversial until 2015 when extensive research finally authenticated it. Here's a picture of this, this Mayan codex. Now, here it is here. Let's see if I can get it bigger. So these little boxes generally, I wish I had a better, I wonder if I can get this pen to, no, I can't do it. But look just below the horizontal line there. You've got these figures up here, these men, or presumed men or human figures, 3 of them going across sitting. And then these round symbols up here are, I think, are noted to be words. They're words, or they are glyphs, which means something. And there were tens of thousands of these writings, and most of them had to do with cultivating the ceiba tree, C-E-B-A, which considered the tree of life among the Mayans, and they all had some very practical thing. I think that this saying that extensive, finally, let me see, 4th codex. Many pages of these books are also lists of numbers that allowed the Mayans to predict lunar. They were really quite, the books had a lot of meaning. I mean, they spoke of religious ritual, but there are also some sciences. These are 11 AD. I'm going to find this one codex. Thank you for being patient as we do this, but I think these are the Mayan glyphs. They look quite similar to Egyptian hieroglyphs, I would say, from my uneducated point of view. And I'm going to, I want to persist because there's one particular glyph. Mayan code. Oh, here's some more here. Wow, I'm not finding the one that is of particular personal meaning to me. Let's see what this one says. Oh, these are, because I started studying this, it got very personal with me. I will share with you briefly, because I think I'll find it eventually, and we'll go back here, that I was in a 10-day meditation, and I was sitting, and I'd been studying Native American spirituality for 25 years, and I went to my first 10-day Vipassana meditation retreat. So it's a 10-day retreat where you meditate from 4:30 in the morning until 9 o'clock at night for 10 days, and there's a 9-day vow of silence. So when you come in on Wednesday night, you zip it up and you sit. And on the 5th day, I had this huge vision that I was sitting there in my meditation. I saw myself laying on a boulder, and I could describe it, and I could take quite a while, but certain events occurred for me. The first time, a spider came out of my chest, slammed down over my chest, and then the spider exploded into a tree. Just blew me away. And the roots of the tree then which were previously the spider's legs, wrapped over my shoulder and broke my shoulder off. In this first vision, I was a stone, kind of like a voodoo doll. I was a stone statue of myself. And I was laying there on the boulder, and out came the spider, slammed me down, and then a tree came out of my chest. That blew me away. And I walked out of the meditation hall totally. I would call it a DMT trip. I had an ayahuasca vision, and I walked over, and there was a tree sitting on top of a boulder with its roots over the boulder. And I went around the back of the tree, and a corner of the boulder had been broken off. I have a picture of this. Then that blew me away. The next day, I was in that same meditation hall. I found myself laying in the same boulder. I had another vision. I was laying in the same boulder, but this time I was alive, and out of my side came a serpent. And I had an amazing experience of this serpent. And I will just say that studying the Native American medicine wheel, the North is the wisdom of the elders, and the eyes of this serpent were black on black, amazing. And the top eye was really deep black and quite wide and expanded. So this was a very wise ancestral serpent. And then all of a sudden, kind of like in the Matrix, and the serpent had scales and hairs, and it had horns. And I couldn't tell if the horns were horns or if they were made out of feathers, like an owl, like a horned owl. And the serpent, all of a sudden, the scales started coming up and light started coming out of the thing. I thought, my gosh, there's a volcano inside of this serpent. It's going to explode. And it goes up, and all of a sudden, the serpent opened its mouth at me, and it had black fangs. And I could see this volcano inside, and I stepped back in fear. And as soon as I stepped back, I saw myself step into the mouth of the serpent and walk into the serpent's mouth. And it wasn't a volcano, it was the sun. I walked onto the sun. So that's my medicine name in Native American spirituality is sun serpent walking. And I told this story. 15 years later, I go to the Yucatan. I go to a city named Muna, and I'm going in Muna, and all of a sudden I see this staff with this serpent going up this thing, and I say, well, I'd like to buy that staff. And the guy says, well, you can't buy the staff. And I said, why? He says, well, that's my medicine staff. I use that in medicine. I said, well, are you Native American medicine person? He said, yes. So then we started comparing stories. He said, well, you can buy the staff. I said, no, I want you to build me something that's my own sun serpent. So I donated some money, and that's still pending. And I keep in touch with Pedro by emails every once in a while. And I have a mutual friend who lives in the Yucatan, and he keeps in touch with Pedro down there. But I come back and I start studying Mayan glyphs. And because this sun serpent, when I took it to my medicine man, he said, this is Quetzalcoatl. This is not some snake. This is Quetzalcoatl. I said, no way. And as I've studied the Aztecs and the Oltecs and the Toltecs and the Mayans had Kukulkan, who is the name of the Aztec Quetzalcoatl. Kukulkan was a much gentler dude than Quetzalcoatl. Kukulkan told the people to sacrifice flowers and butterflies, which blows me away. I love that story. Then I found a codex, and I'm going to find that codex. There's actually a codex. Let's see if it might be in these codexes right here. I wish I were more prepared for this, but who knew where our discussion was going to go? Here it is right here. I find this codex. Oh, wait, maybe it's not it. Yeah, look at this. Here's a guy sitting on a boulder with a tree coming out of his chest. Do you see that? This is the Ceiba tree, the tree of life. Ceba, the Mayan tree of life. And look on top, Kukulkan, the winged serpent, the feathered serpent. This thing is 3,500 years old. And I found it 15 years after my vision. Is that the strangest, weirdest thing? Totally boggles my mind. So anyway, it just boggles my mind. And by the way, I have a picture of the tree growing over the boulder. And then after I had the second vision, I decided that I would sleep out all night and have myself a Native American vision quest. And I walked away from my dorm, walked up 30 yards and found the boulders. Exactly the boulder. I have pictures of them. And not only that, the next year when I went to my meditation, they had moved the bell for the entire monastery to my tree. The bell for the entire monastery is right now next to my tree. And then 15 years later, I go back and they build a new meditation hall, and the men's meditation hall opens up onto my boulder.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. I just, so, and I'm sorry to have hijacked this conversation, but we're talking about a chronophile of events. And somehow my vision I had 15 years ago, or 25 years ago now, was reinforced. I found documentation for it 10 years ago to reinforce that vision on these codexes that existed 3,500 years ago that at least tie into the chronophile in some way. I hope I haven't hijacked the conversation so far, but this is amazing to me. So I'm complete and I'm broken into a sweat, you guys. I don't know what to tell you. I'm just so excited to share. So I want to get back on our conversation. Any comments or questions to this point? Cool.
But I'm going to just make one more, and then we can go right up into the 1800s.
Okay, let's do it.
And you can show the chronophile. But in 1550, which is interesting out of Bucky's book, he says the first known suspension bridge in Europe. So that's 1550 there. Now that tells me that people back then understood the principles of tensegrity. So that jumped out at me. And so again, there may be some other things on these next 2 or 3 pages, but if we can move right up into the 1800s.
All right, let's do that. But let me first also say, Richard, the pyramids in Egypt and the pyramids in South America and the mounds in North America are definitely half of an octahedron.
Yes.
Most people and these are thousands and thousands of years old. And of course, the octahedron is implied in the center of the double tetrahedron, which is the way energy flows. And I think it's very possible that the Egyptians knew about tetrahedra and understood the flow of energy. They understood precession the way Bucky understood it. That's my guess. And so the Egyptian pyramids, which now some say they were built back in 10,000 BC, were based on Bucky's principles, as far as I can tell. So, and there's your tensegrity, your suspension bridge. Let's motor right through here. You guys reading the screen, automatic ribbon loom in 1579, Gregorian calendar revision. Anything catching your eye here? Use of a clock to determine longitude in 1594. 1608. I mean, I'm just hitting some things here. Maybe you see some things.
Well, you see the 1609 with Galileo and Kepler's in their
right
first laws of motion, and
whoops,
you sort of get a picture of when those dates were in terms of when those people made their discoveries. It's not like they're all jumped together around 1 or 2 centuries. It's spread over the 1600s and into the 17s and then 1800s.
Invention of mathematical symbols X and colon in 1632. And I'll tell you, one of the things to really study is the invention of imaginary numbers in the Renaissance, during the Renaissance. That's a wonderful thing to take a look at. I wish we had time to get into all that stuff, but that's okay. The calculating machine in 1642 by Pascal. Mathematical induction by Pascal and laws of probability. Discovery of diffraction. The cellular structure of plants in 1667.
Yeah.
1680, discovery of chlorophyll. 1687, Newton's Principia, whatever it was. We had the mercury thermometer, the 1700s. Iron-covered wooden railways. And I remember the Merrimack and the Monitor, which fought in the Civil War, which were the first metal battleships. And I think the Monitor was a submarine, was partially a submarine. Wasn't it? Or was it the Merrimack?
One of them was, yeah.
One of them was. Wow. Anybody else have any Battle of Hampton? One was quite, there was the so I think the Merrimack was the one that was above ground and the Monitor was quite below ground, but they were both the first ironclad ships. We're trying to get to the 1800s, Richard.
Yeah.
Moving quickly.
Another page.
Yeah, another page over there. Look, beet sugar. Sugar beets were a big, they still are, I think, are a big crop in Utah. Sugar beets were big back in the 1800s in Utah.
Yeah, and they're very big in the southern part of my province in Alberta.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then when you get to 1774, we're just discovering in our ancestry that people from the Yorkshire area of England came to Eastern Canada, and they are part of our ancestry on my wife's side. And the same family has been living on the same farm ever since 1774. They're still there today, and we visited them last summer.
Wonderful. Wow. Reverberatory furnace. I don't know what that means, but it was significant to Bucky. Let's see here. Molybdenum. Do you know what molybdenum is? Bucky thought it was significant. The cotton gin, 1793. Yttrium, I have no idea what that is. Bucky's quite the metallurgist, he's quite the lithography in 1796. Chromium, and now we're in 1800.
Right.
Bleaching powder. Infrared rays were discovered in 1800. Discovery of interference light waves. The first asteroid was discovered in 1801. And then atomic theory in 1803. Anything else in the 1800s that are capturing anybody's attention? And look, all of a sudden we start discovering our elements.
Right.
That's one of the things that I really remember in his, he did several chronophiles in the book leading up to this, and that he did those graphs on how quickly we started discovering elements and started implementing elements, and how critical these discovery of these elements were to the progression of human, civilization. Thermodynamics, 1824. And where do we want to go from here?
We'll go up
Brownian,
to 1895.
okay, Brownian movement's very important to the theory of relativity and gases and chaos theory. I couldn't describe what Brownian movement is, but I could BS an answer that probably wouldn't be correct. The magnetic telegraph, rubber vulcanizing, photography. Now, here's something. My grandfather, my grandmother's father was into photography back in the 1800s. And that put him in the kind of upper middle class, because in order to be a photographer, you had to deal with silver. So silver nitrate was critical to photography. I have tons of pictures of my grandmother, and she's the one who migrated from England in the about the time of the Titanic. I've told that story to you guys before.
Right.
So photography was an important. If my grandmother's father hadn't been a photographer, he wouldn't have had the money to migrate to America. So I just thought and I think that's what the significance of the chronophile is what events in history are making what's happening today possible. I think that's it, isn't it, Richard? Is that what?
Well, that's my sense of it too. And I mean, where else do you find sort of a comprehensive collection of all of these different dates that most of the time we might remember one or two of them that are attached to certain events or experiences that we relate to.
Right on.
So if we get up to 1895.
Moving there now. Boy, he has a lot of stuff going on between 1850 and 1895. Yeah. Railroad refrigerator cars, they had to be important for the development of civilization. 1870s. The incandescent lamp.
Yeah.
Tuberculosis was isolated. The first central electric power station in 1882. Whoops, what's going on? Okay, there. Okay, 1885. Where do you want to go? 1890s?
Well, we can stop on 1885. When you look at Van 't Hoff's laws, Van 't Hoff is the chemist that worked in tetrahedral models. And he's also the first Nobel Prize in chemistry. And it's his work in modeling that Fuller argues was lost, if you want, to the kind of mathematical games. And he tried to reintroduce Van 't Hoff's idea of modeling back into sort of a contemporary sort of skill that somebody should buy into. And that's when we also discovered that the tetrahedron is the molecular structure of the carbon atom, and the carbon atom is considered to be the essence of life. And so I've always found it interesting now that I work in the area of suicide prevention or trying to save life. And I'm doing it with a structure that equates to the molecular structure of the carbon atom, which relates to the idea of the essence of living rather than essence of dying.
Well, and I think that's a very powerful point. And if that's the visible, and if one gets to the synergy of it all and looks at the metaphysics of it all, the way energy flows is the formation of carbon and other matter follows the flow of this energy, which is now the metaphysical aspect, which is the jitterbug, which is the tetrahedron or the cube octahedron collapsing into a all the way down through to a four-bounded triangle. And
Yeah,
then,
and the thing that's really interesting about the jitterbug is that it's dynamic, it's fluxing, it's interchangeable.
right,
And so it really is taking us away from Newton's notion of a static universe with the idea that that we're all inert. In other words, we're all lazy, unless there's an outside force that either pulls us or pushes us into action. And so that mechanical sort of understanding of human behavior, I think, has persisted over time. And so we don't really understand the principles of self-organizing. We always think that, you know, somebody that is stronger in the strength, if you want to push or pull, is what's necessary to make people behave or to do what needs to be done.
well, it's very important for people in authority to teach others that they're inherently lazy and they
Right.
need somebody in charge,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And so I buy into that. And of course, this whole idea of scarcity, of sparsity,
Right.
Keynesian economic, Darwinian economics, survival of the fittest, it all fits into an imperial plot.
Yeah, and that's where the Malthusian economics comes in and makes the argument there's not enough to go around, so there's winners and losers, and
Yeah.
best.
And we're the winners and you're the losers, by the way. Right?
Yeah, well, that's the whole idea that you need to get on the winning side.
Right.
But there we are in 1895, and that was the year that Bucky Fuller was born. And so you can see what he wrote about what happened in his year. When I started looking at his birth date, 1895, the only connection I had in that time period, 1895 to 1900, was the very first development of what was called the social work profession, happened in Germany in about 1899, Germany and the Netherlands. So I put that into my chronophile just to give a connection to that last 5 years of the 19th century. And then when I move up a little further, then I can get to 1904.
Hang on a second. Let's don't leave behind the discovery of Krypton. This is very important for us who are big believers in Superman.
Yeah, that's right.
I just sorry, but I just couldn't pass that up. And then 1904, did you say?
Yeah, if I get to 1904, then that's when my father was born in eastern part of Canada. So we could even pause there and say, you know, in our own histories, our own chronophiles, does anything, were there any events that we can connect to in that last 1895 to 1900 years, or let's say in 1904 to 1910? Was this a time when, you know, ancestors, grandfathers, grandmothers, perhaps other events in our life, in those lifetimes, that makes sense?
Yeah. No, I think that's the real power of this whole conversation, Richard, is that what Bucky is doing with this chronophile concept is connecting human consciousness to the history and evolution of human civilization. And he did that at his scale. And I think for me personally, it's important that I personally engage with this concept to figure out what the context is for my family and my origins relative to human development. And so that's kind of why what you gave us the challenge, and you said your group had done this analysis with and use of this chronophile. I thought that was so powerful that
Well, and actually what happened is I put out the challenge, and and the only person that I know of that's done it is me. So,
Oh, interesting.
um,
1905. Go
saying
ahead.
in 1905 or 1904, my father was born, and so out of that group of items, I selected safety razor blades because I remember in growing up in my family, my father was, used safety razors
Yeah.
for shaving. So before
Yeah.
that, I guess his maybe his father used something else. Well, they probably used those straight blades, but
Yeah. The
uh,
ones you see in the movies all the time.
yeah,
The ones that are so life-threatening,
yeah.
as
And then
opposed to a
when you move
safety
up
reason.
into
Go ahead.
1905, you see that was Einstein's first sort of theory of relativity. And then when you jump up to 1915,
Haber process. What do you know what the Haber process is? Does that have to do
no,
with nitrogen?
no,
I read a book called The Alchemy of Air, and it seemed to me it had one of those names in there. Okay, we're moving up to, the military tank was built in 1914.
I've got some things here as well. Hi, sorry, couldn't make it
yeah,
earlier.
welcome.
Hi, yes. I've got this book. I don't know if you can see it. Yes, I read the chronophile that you did. Yeah, Richard, that was amazing. And I'm looking, oh, we should all do this for ourselves, And so what I'm holding in my hand is this book that says 1,001 Inventions That Changed the World. So it was written in 2011. So I've got information up to 2011. So just now, when you're talking about 1910, right? 1910, there's also synthetic rubber, fuel injection, rayon, aluminum foil, infrared photography, depth charge, neon lamp. Yeah, that's extra things that we could add to 1910. We can literally add a lot. So 1911.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
What were you
so
saying?
sorry, Richard, yes.
Did you have a comment, Richard?
No, go ahead, Anne. It's
Go ahead, Ann. This is
Yeah.
great, Ann. Please continue.
So looking at this, looks like we can add. And so in 1911, there's the starter motor, there's the knapsack parachute. So it's the X-ray study of metals, right? This got X-ray crystallography. Let me see. I'm trying to go map it against it. They have cloud chamber, and then this MDMA psychotropic drug, the ecstasy. They brought in rotavator, which is for farming. Conveyor belt came in. Oh, wait. So wait. 2011. Okay, sorry. 2011. They only had two things: starter motor and knapsack. Then we can add into what is already on that list. Yeah. 1912. 1912. They had the X-ray crystallography, cloud chamber, ecstasy, rotavator. Conveyor belt came in 1913. Yeah, so we could add to this, Oh my God, this is really, yeah. Zip fastener, did they have 1913 zip fastener? X-ray tube, stainless steel, liquid, stainless steel. So their list is also not, oh yeah, they chose the ones that they said that changed the world. Yeah.
right.
But left out all these. Okay.
So in 1915, you scroll down a bit, you get the general relativity theory. And in my background, in 1915, a man by the name of Abraham Flexner, who was a well-known medical educator, he reformed medical education in both United States and Canada, and he spoke to an internet or a national group of my discipline, social work, in 1915, and he basically the question was, is social work a profession? And he answered it with he answered the question by saying no, it isn't, because he was using a Newtonian reductionist kind of machine metaphor model to say that we don't have a systematic method of either discovery or research or in practice. And so my profession has been under the stress of being told they weren't a profession way back then, and they've been trying to find ways to say that we are. And so I've often said, what would have happened had Einstein spoke to that national group and not Flexner? And he would have talked about the importance of relativity and relationships and all that sort of thing. And that's what the discipline's all about, is relationships. So it would have been a huge turning point for the profession to be told that they're to be spoken to by the person who discovered the general theory of relativity. So
Yeah. I mean, and let me expand on that for a minute. General relativity is that time and space is relative to each individual observer.
mm-hmm.
So to say that reality is there is not consistent with general relativity, because the reality that's there is different to each individual observer based on their position in space and how fast they're moving.
Yeah, and that really gets into the attitude before, in terms of the notion of we're all inert and need to be pushed or pulled, but also there was the belief that we are all everything is independent in space and time. And this particular, I mean, of course, Bucky also argues that from that 1915 point on, the only constant there is change. And so with what you've just said, Steve, it's also basically underpinned by the idea that everything is interdependent in space and time, and the observed objectivity is impossible. You can't separate the observer from the observed, which is what the mainstream science has been trying to do all along, is to try and make the case that you can set up experiments and observations that are independent or detached from the observer. And this is what to me is so beautiful about the tetrahedron, is that most of us are used to the idea of three-dimensional is height, width, and length.
Right.
But when you put the fourth in, and number one is you can't do it in a perpendicular three-dimension. You have to shift the angle so that you can connect to the fourth one, which then becomes the observer. And that was Fuller's argument as to why the minimum sort of system perception is 4 minimum whole. So you have to have the observer and the observed together, which is what he was all about when he wrote about tetrascole and trying to show his daughter Allegra that the observer watching the Trinity has to be connected, otherwise there is no Trinity. and that was his way of connecting the observer and the observed into a 60-degree angle tetrahedron model.
And you mentioned the Tetrascroll book.
Yeah, that one.
And And just to reinforce what you said, and I want to come back to these more inventions, but this idea of the relativity of time and space, I mean, what you're saying is really profound. It's easy to overlook how profound what you're saying is. In other words, if Einstein had addressed reality, his ideas of reality at the time when this discussion is sociology, a science, the things would have been a lot different. The idea that science to date is still doing what it can with double-blind experiments and triple-blind experiments, trying to isolate events that are going to occur independent of the observer. And all of our science is based on that.
Yeah.
And yet and of course, quantum mechanics, the Copenhagen interpretation, at least, which is only believed by about 23% of physicists, is the idea that the observation creates the collapse of the wave function and creates particle reality. And I just want to say one more thing about this relativity. You brought it up, but there's a really good point as to this observer. In other words, if object 1 is moving towards object 2 at 100 miles per hour, it really doesn't tell us about the nature of reality, because object number 1 could be moving in the opposite direction at 400 miles an hour, and object number 2 could be moving in that same opposite direction at 500 miles an hour, and it would look like object number 1 is moving towards object number 2, or it looked like either object is moving toward each other at 100 miles an hour, when in actuality, they're both moving in a completely different direction at variable speeds. But because nobody's looking at where the observer's position is, and because all observations are based on the subjective experience of an observer, it has to be one or the other.
Right.
I don't know if I said that clearly, but to me, that's really important. Is that if object A is moving towards object B at 100 miles an hour, there are many ways to create that phenomenon that one could measure. Object A is moving toward B, because B could be moving towards A at 100 miles an hour.
Yeah.
Or A could be moving at 150 miles an hour this way, and B could be moving at 250 miles an hour in the same direction. You get what I'm saying? And it's kind of, I think I picture it, but it's really difficult to put in words. And of course, that's probably why human beings have trouble coping with the whole concept. And we'd just rather see that reality is out there. And we want to describe reality that's out there.
Well, I mean, that's what I was doing in the classroom, that you go into a classroom and you're sitting in a room that has height, width, and lengths.
Right.
And everybody in the classroom is experiencing the same three-dimensional space.
Right.
Except they aren't, because depending on where they sit will affect what they observe. And if you move them around, then what they saw as reality or three-dimensional space in one location will be different in the next location. And of course, as Bucky would say, because we are creating new cells and dispensing cells, that who we are as a human being at this very moment is different than we were 10 seconds ago and what we will be 10 seconds from now. So it really brings home the idea that you can't separate the observer from the observed.
Yeah.
And hope to get some kind of objective reality out of that.
And if we go to the next step, which is, as Einstein said, everything is energy, it to me then throws the whole thing up in the air, because the observer is simply energy existing in an energy field.
Yeah.
And to isolate and say this observer is somehow prioritized energy, it doesn't really make any sense when one steps into that kind of thing. Well, I'm done with my rant.
Or we just can do some more, like connecting to ourselves. Like, for example, I can now also say that, okay, my father was born in 1904. This is 1915, so he's only 9 years old. So what the hell is he going to know about theories of relativity, etc.? And so you can see that again, times and circumstances can affect, you know, either what you've been given from your own family or your own ancestors and what they pass on to you, and then what you experience in your own time frame in relation to either this kind of list or just picking out certain key element or key events in Fuller's life and see whether or not you're connected to that time period as well in some way.
And my favorite thing to talk about is that in 1912, the Titanic sank.
Yeah.
And it was in 1912 that my grandfather decided to buy tickets on the next boat. That the tickets on that Titanic were too expensive. So my grandmother did not come from England on the Titanic. My grandmother and her family, she came on the next boat.
Right.
Yeah.
So we put that in context.
Yes.
Good.
No Steve.
Yeah. So, Anne, what else do you have in your book there? What else, is there anything that you want to bring up in your book?
I know actually it's just a different type. Like there is this gas mask. It's like 1 year, just a few years apart. Like say the tungsten filament, it appears here in 1913. In the book it says 1916. So there's a lot of overlapping. Even the depth charge, I think in Bucky's is 1910. Oh no, depth charge here in this book is 1910, but then it's showing up here. I think 1915 or 16. Depth bomb. 1916 depth bomb. Yeah. So it's just a matter of timing. So there is a lot of overlaps. Yeah, a lot.
And what's nice about your book is that you've got it up to 2011, and this one is only up to 1985 or something, or 82.
Yes. So what maybe let me see first. If when we'll let me see if I can add in like doing it the way you've done it, yeah, Richard, side by side, and just add, you know, and extend the inventions.
It was called 1001 Inventions. Yeah.
Yes. Let's see. It says 1001 inventions that changed the world.
There it is. Oh, and psychology too.
And
there's the book.
Written by Jack Challoner. Yes. Yep.
Gee, there's a $3 one on a used one for $3.
What year is this published? It'll be good if it's.
Is it Jack?
Yep. Jack Challoner. Yeah. Mine is 2011 version. It'll be good to get the latest.
2011. I don't know. There's a date on here.
This one didn't say since 2600 BC. No.
Yeah. So this does. Yeah. Here's scissors. Here's scissors were developed. In 1500 BC, scissors were developed.
Yeah, they even came up with toilet paper. I saw it. I don't know where it is.
What year was toilet paper, Anne?
Let me find out. Let me go to the index.
Wow. Dunlop tires, 1888. Very cool.
I gotta go through it again. I don't know. It popped up just now. Because the index doesn't have it as. Well, it doesn't list the items, the inventions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Insulin was in 1922,
Yeah.
and vitamin D. Very interesting. Okay, let's see, 10:46 Utah time. So it's probably a good time. Is there anything you want to say, Richard, to wrap up where we are right now and like put a T on it for next week? What do you think?
Well, I mean, for me, again, if you go up to 1927, um,
Okay. I don't know why my machine is so touchy. Oh, I see. 1927. Hit a new page. All right,
there we
good.
are. So you've got all those things that are in 1927, referring to the Fuller writing down the Dymaxion house and energetic, synergetic. And not that he would have to do it there, but we know that 1927 was when he had his epiphany in terms of being on the edge of at least contemplating suicide and deciding not to. And supposedly his epiphany was based on the idea of whether he had the right to do it or not. And then his answer was, no, you don't, because you belong to universe. And so it's sort of like universe has to give you permission, so to speak. But he was really, I think, at that point, realizing that even though he was a tiny sort of fleck in the universe, he was an integral part of universe, and to just off himself was not the thing to do. And that's when he went into his own meditation and contemplation time and came out with his idea that he wants now to have like the universe to work for 100% of humanity with no disadvantage to anybody. So that's really a critical sort of thinking kind of turning point for him. And it's just interesting to put it up against, and it's also, of course, he's not going to put it in there in terms of, inventions and so forth. But he was fired. His second daughter was just born. He was still suffering the loss of his first daughter, and part of it had to do with his own guilt, because he was not a very responsible sort of parent during some of her 4 years of life. So there was all kinds of interesting mixes of what was going on in his life that had him make the turn that he did make, and then stay with it for the next 50 or so years.
Right on.
And what's really interesting for me is that when you get up into the 1970s, and you get past some of the books that he wrote in the 30s and then in the 60s, and then you get to Synergetics being published in 1975, and then Synergetics 2 in 1979. Well, for most of us, it doesn't register what that means time-wise, because what it now says to me is that, wait a minute, 1975, and add 5 years to get me back to 1895. This man was 80 years old when he published Synergetics. And 4 years later, he's 84 years old. And so I can put it in the context of, well, I'm now that age. So I haven't written a synergetics yet. And the rest, you know, all of us in our own age can say, whatever we are, 50, 60, 70, there's still hope that, you know, by 80 you could write your modus operandi, or your the book that you've, you know, had in you all these years. And so, I mean, that's what's really fascinating for me now, to see when he was prolific in some of his writings, like even in the 60s, and you add 5 years on to 63 or 67, even 67 with the geodesic dome. He's in his 70s when he started to get really recognized, and things are happening for him. Whereas most of us, I think, might sort of make the assumption that, oh, Bucky must have done this when he was 40 or 50, you know, at the prime of his life. He didn't do it until he was an older adult. Anyway, I'm complete on that.
Okay.
I have a question for both Richard and Steve. Yeah, when did you first get introduced to? Because I saw in your own chronophile, when you were given the first book, the synergetics book, right, Richard? So,
Right.
but was that the first time you were introduced to Bucky? And then same thing with Steve. When was the first time you were introduced to Bucky's work?
Yeah. Well, it was really interesting. Two things happened. One was that I belonged to a book club, so the book of the month that particular year or time was synergetics, which I had never heard of. But I had also heard about something called family synergy. And so I looked up Family Synergy, and it's an organization in California. And then when I looked at it further, I discovered Family Synergy was alternative living. In other words, in this case, it had to do with threesomes or foursomes. And I was at a conference in LA, and again, I didn't know what Family Synergy was all about, really. I phoned the chairman up and said, I'd like to come and visit. Well, he was very hesitant about allowing a total stranger to come visit. But when I visited him, he and his wife, they were both marine biologists. They were married, and then they decided to have an open marriage. And so they had a second husband, if you want. And so I spent the evening with him, and they were telling me about their lifestyle. And it was very interesting because everything was very normal. And of course, the wife was delighted because, for one reason, is that one husband was a handyman, and he repaired, you know, broken fixtures and that sort of thing in the house, and the other husband was a cook. So so she had the best of all worlds. And one of the husbands was a aspiring playwright, and he was involved in a play that was going to be produced in a local theater. And so he was away from home an awful lot, and he started feeling guilty over the fact that he was abandoning his home responsibilities. But the other parts of the family said, no, that's why we live the way we do, is because when somebody has to go off and do something that's important to them, then the rest of us take over and help out. So someday, we might want to do something, and then you will be the one that stays home and helps out. So it was all a very interesting dynamic. Plus, when I saw them, they'd been together for 8 years, and the average sort of marriage in the U.S. at the time was something like 6 years. So they they had beaten the average length, survival of a marriage. So anyway, so I had two meanings of synergy all of a sudden come into my mind: Bucky's idea of synergy and this particular alternative living notion of synergy. Yeah.
Wow.
Thank you for sharing that. First time I'm hearing this.
First time
Well,
I've told
for
it. Yeah.
It might be good in our close if we mention how we first got in touch with Bucky. So is there anything else you want to say, Richard, as far as your takeaways today and your feelings, and then pass it on to somebody else, and make sure that each person who shares tells when they found Bucky, when Bucky appeared in their life. Want to finish up, Richard? How are you feeling, and what's your takeaway?
Well, I'm feeling very energized, and my takeaway is really the satisfaction of having taken the time to build my own chronophile and now being able to share it with others, and even to continue building on it with resources like what Anne just shared, so that we could actually build beyond 1980, whatever it is the critical path stopped at. So yeah, this is quite exciting, and maybe somebody else will try and build up their own chronophile along the kind of modeling that I showed in mine. So there we are, and go to Nelson and Karen. What's your takeaway? How are you feeling, and what's your takeaway from your visit for the first time in quite a while?
Oh, wow.
Ay,
Thank you, Victor. What I feel very I don't understand, don't say these emotions, but I remember all of my studies because I am chemical engineering, and when I study in the university, I see all of these inventions, and never we think into relations with the Bucky life. When I see this, the word file, that sending the call, I don't understand why we are doing the what is the name,
Chronophile.
chronos file. Yes.
fine.
Yes, and in this moment, I take away is the importance of our file, and the moments on the people who live with our family, with our community, and our countries, and just to understand what is the moment now the humanity and the word, because when you move the file about the words, you see the inventions who word makes change the mindset of the human being. And this is very interesting about the chronophiles. I'm very happy about this call. Thank you, Nelson. What do you feel, and what did you take away?
Okay, I feel in this moment, I don't know. I don't know. I take away in my life. In my life, I don't know about this information. For me, is new. See, it's new. The invents. Uh, 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 was okay. It's very important in the life, but in my life, I don't forgot.
That
Was
important
important, see, important. But
now.
now, see, I think is very, very important, very important. And now, ¿cómo se dice?
Construir,
Building this, digamos, toda la vida.
seeing the life.
Sí, the life. Ese, wow, I don't know. It's very important. Know this information. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ali, what do you feel and what do you take away?
Yeah. Hi, Nelson. Good to see you again. It's been quite a while. Yeah. And nice to meet you, Karen. Yeah. Okay. Actually, I'm so glad I managed to jump in at the last bit of it. Yeah. Because normally when you read a book, all right, and then when it comes to pages like the appendix and whatever else is at the back, you normally just skip them, right? So was it Richard? You mentioned that why don't we look at the chronophile part? That we have a look at it, and so when I thought about, oh yeah, actually that's something that we can do together, right? But I didn't know how far it can impact us personally. Okay, so when I looked at it, I'm like, okay, chronophile, we should be doing this with our lives to see what we have done and to map it. And the thing is, it's not just about our life. That one would be, you can write down a summary, it's like a resume, right? But then to actually visit it and then look at what goes on around it, and then to match it against our age and versus what others have done at that age, I think that's phenomenal. And then this list, when I first saw it as well, the speed of inventions, that just came out. We're talking about human history, right? Human history, and then the fact that the number of inventions, it's like the boulder starting at the top of a mountain, right? It's huge and it's not moving, it's just stationary. Somebody just decides to push it, and it could be even having a bulldozer to push it, right? But as it rolls, it's very slow and it goes down, it just gathers momentum. That is a very good example of creation and invention. I normally talk about that boulder, right? But this one, literally, and that boulder, for me, there's no bottom. There's no bottom. Because it just gets more and more and faster and faster, as the momentum picks up, yeah? And when you look at, when I saw Bucky's list, it just reminded me of that, just the numbers of just grew. So yeah, that's my takeaway. And so Steve, oh yeah, when I first started with Bucky it was actually from Robert Kiyosaki's community, right? I went to see I went to his program, 3-day, and I think that was the last one that he did over this side of the world for 3 days. And I got introduced to some of his ecosystem, right? Like Blessinger and at that time there was a David Novak and all that. They came along. So a couple of years later, I went to Blassinger's training because he came to Malaysia. And I looked at it, I said, I got to go for that one. And that was where I first picked up on Buckminster Fuller. I can't recall which of Blassinger's training that the Bucky's thoughts, Bucky's references to Bucky kept coming up, and then it just got more when we went for Kelly Rich's training. So I would say it was probably the midpoint of the 2000 decade, well, maybe 2004, 5, 6, thereabouts, when I first got introduced. But then it used to be, okay, we know Bucky, we know his definition of unity and so on. Then Kelly Ritchie, when he did his training, we attended, and he came to visit us in our school. He sat for hours with us and we talked about all this, and he actually wanted us to do more of that. But then I kind of chickened out because it was overwhelming, right? But he knew that he felt that this was something our school could have taken on. So the minute I was ready, I called him again. And so he invited me to come on board the call. So then after that, Bucky now is like, so important. Yes. So now I'm trying to map it against and see what I can do, especially on the education side. Yeah. And the next one is actually to look at it on the economic side as well. Finance and economy of the world. Okay. So Steve, how do you feel and what did you take away today?
Just before you do it, Steve, wanted to say one thing in relation to Anne, is that one of the things that really was interesting for me when I was doing the chronophile was also to chronicle what students were writing in papers that I was assigning and asking them to critique my model using Fuller's work. And so I've gathered papers, I've kept papers from students going back to the 1980s and into the 90s and the 2000s, and watched students write papers that started out saying, I hated everything that the instructor was teaching me. And at the end of the term, when I investigated it further, one student said, my nemesis became my ally.
I saw that one.
So it was kind of fun taking excerpts from student papers to reflect on what they thought of Bucky's work in this discipline. Yeah. So I was thinking that with over the time that you've had your experience with the students, what kind of changes have occurred in the students and or the ways that the teaching unfolded over the beginnings to now?
Yep, you're right. There are. Well, yes, maybe next round I'll share with you.
Right. Sorry, Steve. It's over to you.
Do you want to share now, Anne, or do we want to wait till next time?
It's just a quick one. Sometimes it's just things parents get worried about, but it hasn't changed. Like they're worried, but it's just the things that the things have changed. Because during my time, when I was young, parents were worried about the TV. It'll spoil your eyes, and they think that they're worried we'll get hooked on it and we won't do our studies, right? So, but we've turned out all right. Then my daughter's time, it was the computers. So everybody was very worried about, and PlayStation, the Nintendos and all that came out. So most parents were so worried about their kids spoiling their eyes, same thing. Okay, and also like they're not going to study, right? And then after that, when I saw my students about 10 years later, it was the phones. So but the point is that, and even before the whole TV thing, it was reading. We were reading a lot. People were worried we'll spoil our eyes and we'll get hooked. We don't study. Yeah. So my point is, at every stage there's something, but parents don't get it, that the kids all turn out all right. Don't worry, let them be. So that's the thing that that's something to share, right? So Steve, sorry, over to you.
No, don't be sorry. Absolutely have you share that. Really appropriate. I'm overwhelmed with something. I have something very logical to say here in my notes as we went today, but I want to say something. Bucky's. I'll say first of all, I first learned about Bucky through John Denver, and John Denver and Werner Erhard. Back in the day, I was involved with consciousness seminars and workshops. There was a thing called LifeSpring, and then there was this thing called EST, which developed into Forum, which were developments of Werner Erhard, which were this Werner Erhard technology, which is now called Landmark.
Yes.
LifeSpring and now Landmark. But LifeSpring kind of went in the back. The Werner Erhard's thing, Landmark, went from EST to something else, and there were some other iterations, and finally now it's Landmark. I got acquainted back then because I got involved with these consciousness workshops. These consciousness workshops were developed because during the Korean War, American soldiers would get captured and they would immediately confess about the evils of capitalism in 30 seconds, and I had all these soldiers confessing about how capitalism was corrupt, and they'd capture a Korean soldier and the guy would not He was totally committed to how cool Korean was. And the CIA and all these guys wanted to know how is it these Koreans have so much stamina and are so critical in their belief system? The Americans got no stamina. What are belief systems? What technology is there? And so I first got involved with it through these consciousness and awareness things. And I bumped into Bucky because Werner Erhard got on a big campaign about Bucky. And John Denver then wrote the song, What One Man Can Do, based on Buckminster Fuller's life. I notice I'm feeling quite emotional because that song, What One Man Can Do, was always a theme in these workshops. The workshops were always, you are important. Each individual person is important. And what can you do? And that song, What One Man Can Do, was one of the overriding themes. And so my first contact with Bucky was there, and I was into the geodesic dome and everything. And I started building spaceship Earth houses with tires, and I was doing straw bale houses. And I got into a guy with a double tetrahedron, and I mean, but it was kind of airy-fairy. It was a mix between how do you build a straw bale house that's compatible to maintain, that's sustainable for an Earth, and then these weird hippie guys spinning these double tetrahedron little medallions and talking about energy. So I didn't really relate to the synergetic aspect of Bucky until I got involved with Kelly, and I got involved with Kelly through I think probably through Wayne Palmer, probably, and joined in just because I was in real estate, and Wayne was training for Kiyosaki, and I was training for other guys. And Wayne and we were actually partners together in a business called National Note, and we did some real estate stuff together. But he went off and branched off into Kiyosaki stuff, and I branched off and stuff. And I have 5 workbooks on creative real estate, and I was on infomercials around the country and whatever. So that's how I got in. But I didn't realize I've always been involved in the spiritual nature of the universe, the energetic nature of the universe. And I never clearly saw spirituality and energyality as the same thing. And I see it so much as the same thing. Energy and spirit, so much the same. You know, metaphysics, energy and spirit, as opposed to physics, material reality. And so, and I want to say that this call right here is proof. Nelson and Karen, the fact that I feel so badly that I don't speak Spanish, and this whole thing was in English. So here you guys over there are listening to these English guys rapping at 90 zillion miles an hour, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, if this was in Spanish, I would not get anything out of this. So I have to give you guys the award of the century. You know, thanks for showing up, and thanks for persisting, and thanks for having a takeaway. You know, I would be totally dazed if I'd heard this in Spanish. I would have no freaking idea what's going on. But the very fact that you are here is proof of the energetic reality of the universe, of the relativity of reality, because somehow you're in Colombia and I'm up here in Utah, and yet here we are in the same space. There's something that's the same about you that's about me. We are energetically connected, even though we're physically have nothing to do. This is exactly what the chronophile invites me to look at. I think my reality is formed by the events that have occurred in human evolution that have put me in my cultural spot. And for me to take a look at those events and say, oh, like Amerigo Vespucci, and the fact that these are the Americas, but yet we're and Columbus discovered, but we're not Columbia, and why am I exactly the way I am? It's because of the chronophile. It's because of the influence of the chronophile that's relative to my particular space. And that chronophile, and yet here we are connecting. So like, this comes back, this whole concept of relativity and reality. We as observers are the essence of reality. The fact that you're in Colombia and I'm in Utah and Richard's up in Canada and Anna's in Malaysia. The physical reality is not that important.
Yes.
We're on a big mission together, which blows my mind. So I just want to me, studying synergetics and studying this chronophile is all about relativity. It's all about helping me understand how I relate. Now let's come back to a couple mental things, and then I'm going to end with something else. We have this tonight. We went through 21 pages of this book. We went from 4000 BC to 1912 BC. And I think it's eventful that we entered there because 1912 is when my grandmother did not come across on the Titanic. So I'm here because of that. And we ended on that. So that's really cool. And I had done a little summary here. I broke it out in 2-page increments. Bucky went from 4,000 BC to 200 BC, 3,000 years in the first 2 pages, 1,500 years in the next 2 pages, 200 years in the next 2 pages, 50 years in the next 2 pages, 35 years in the next 2 pages, 22 years in the next 2 pages, 30 years in the next 2 pages, 21 years in the next 2 pages, 15 years in the next 2 pages, 12 years in the next 2 pages, and 11 years to get us to 1912. So that's a summary of what we did tonight. Okay. And I want to, tonight, I want to say one more thing. Any comments on that? Because that's kind of a summary of what we did tonight. There's one more thing. I'm going to plug it into the chat, but I want you guys to see this. A lot of people don't know this, but the Greeks had 2 definitions for the word time. There was chronos time, chronological time, tick-tock, tick-tock, chronological or sequential time, such as time clocks and calendars. Chronos time is, crud, I've got this thing in my way. Oh, I know how to fix it. I do that. Yeah. So chronos time is time that needs to be consistently tracked and controlled. And examples include don't waste time and time is money. Okay. But the Greeks also had kairos time, which was fateful time or emotional time. So this is clocks, left brain, thought, and kairos time was fateful time. In other words, every day at 10 o'clock, I turn right at the second street. But today I turned right at the 2nd Street at 10 o'clock and I got hit by a car. In other words, there's fateful time that makes a difference, or right brain or emotional time. This refers to good or proper time for action, such as a moment when time stops and everything feels possible. I don't know why those words aren't connected, but they aren't. Kairos time can be something simple, like taking a walk to clear your head. It requires releasing some anxiety around chronos time. The word kairos comes from an ancient Greek term that translates the right time or the opportune moment. Now, this relates exactly to our opening and our closing on each of our calls. How are you feeling? And what are your expectations? It's the same thing. This is a call for chronos and kairos. It's a call to relate to reality 2 different ways. So I just thought that was wonderful. And I think that's it for my notes. And I'm just really grateful for all of you and for the energy that we have today. We're going to continue. I think the one other thing that we want to do, I want to make sure that we're focusing on this chart. It'd be cool. I plan on like going through. I wish I had more time. I could plug in like 1912, the Titanic in here, along with it. So we kind of integrate, and it would be fun to have, each of us have our chronophiles down here as to what was going on. To me, this is such a wake-up call because I am so involved in my little world of cultural happenings, And by being involved with Nelson and with Karen and with Ann and with Richard, it's like an invitation to come pull my head out of the hole in the ground and wake up to reality. And for me, that's what this call is. It's a wake up to reality. I'm grateful for every one of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hope you make it again, Nelson and Karen. It's been wonderful having you.
Yes, thank
And-
you.
Thank you.
I'm
See you
complete.
next week. Bye.
See you next week.
Bye
Okay.
bye.